Thanks for joining me in Scheffy's Sandbox. I'm April D. Scheffler, and I invite you to play with me and my guest today, Elliott Scheirman. Welcome, Elliott.
Hi, thanks for having me, April.
Well, I think every good meeting starts off with a beverage. So in this segment, we grab coffee. We pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the beach. And because it's a virtual coffee house, it has anything you want. What would be the order you give the barista?
I'll probably go for a chai tea this morning.
Okay. Well,
I'm
now,
not much of a coffee drinker.
no, well, that's fine. Sometimes tea is good. And you said chai?
Yes.
Well, now that you have your refreshing beverage, let's dive right in. On this podcast, we allow you to shine brightly. As Marianne Williamson said, your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. So as you play big, Elliott, are there any claims to fame, times people may have seen you or your work? And I guess you could omit the whole part about you're running for Congress, because we are definitely going to be covering that.
Yeah, that's probably what's gotten my name and face out there the most. I'm from the Houston area, and have a lot of ties here and grew up in and around, and got 2 degrees at the University of Houston. So if you have ever seen someone going absolutely crazy and having an awesome time at a University of Houston football game, that might be an example where you've seen me. I also like to volunteer around town as well. The Houston Food Bank has received much of the focus of my efforts over this summer, especially with so many people losing their jobs. So I don't know that I might have been recognized there because I've been wearing masks, but I've definitely been spotted there several times.
Well, in this segment, we call Linguistic Tag. Guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation, something that doesn't get enough play, enough airtime. And the prior guest chose dramaturgy, which is a sociological concept developed by Irving Goffman that uses the metaphor of theater to explain human behavior. So unless you've already had some familiarity with that concept, it may be kind of difficult to incorporate that. But just take a stab at it. You are tasked to try and somehow fit that into our conversation today.
Okay, I
Okay?
will. That seed has been planted.
Okay, great. Now, you also get to choose a word for our next guest to dance with, and it could be a peculiar word that you find funny or something that just resonates with you. So what are you laying down for them to pick up?
That's a really good question. I think that I'm going to go with decentralization.
Okay, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but did you want to add anything?
Sure. Just and most of the concept of what we do as libertarians. That's the party I'm running with. We like to focus on ways that people can they can solve problems, and we're not saying that if you vote for us, your problems will all go away. We just like to say that if you can decentralize a lot of things, you can have a more diverse approach to problem solving.
Like it.
So decentralization.
Well, I think in a large part, we have an article in the Houston Press to thank for this particular podcast interview. The article had stated regarding voting third party, quote, "It's the political equivalent of sending thoughts and prayers in a time of crisis. The act is mostly performative, self-serving, and an empty gesture that doesn't aid anyone," end quote. So, in my past, I think this would have really resonated with me. And I think that's why I picked up on this, because sometimes when things you don't even, even if something is said or you see something, you don't even acknowledge it because it's not on your radar. But I think why I paid attention to this is because this echoed how I felt in my past. And I was like, you know what? I want to give people the other side of this and permission to vote their conscience. So I wanted to, I guess, again, thank the author of that article, because I think it's going to act as a springboard for us to discuss that with people. Because I think I felt like that kind of shamed and belittled a person's voice and vote. And I'm eager to have your take on this, but I have found that when you vote for one of the two major parties, that person on the other side of the aisle will think you're stupid, right? But when you vote third party, all of a sudden you're labeled dangerous or irresponsible. So my question to you is, why do you think that is?
Well,
Or do you
whether
agree to
it,
that?
well, I would certainly disagree with that initial statement that you read in the press. The Whether or not the person who said it intended it as such, that whole mentality is essentially a tactic used to discourage people from voicing any dissent to the status quo. And it's honestly the same argument could be applied to anyone who votes for a major party that ends up losing an election, because what they wanted to happen ultimately doesn't matter because they lost. So if you're just going to disenfranchise the 80% of America that didn't vote in the way of the winning party's candidate, then that's kind of a silly premise to begin with. It's if we were just as third party voters and for my case candidates, we're not doing this just because we want to be ineffectual. We're doing this because we want to grow something that is a long-term plan and sustainable. And everyone says win local elections before you put up a presidential candidate or something like that. So what we try to do is say, okay, we're going to run people in as many races as we can field, and we're going to try to make we have a roadmap to success. And that roadmap doesn't start with one elections, everyone suddenly magically voting third party. It starts with, us running campaigns that we aren't going to win and getting more and more percentages each go around because our message resonates with people. And, it's a building process. In the last 5 elections, the Libertarian Party has increased almost 1,000% in terms of voting support, and that's real tangible growth. That is, if we continue on this trajectory, we're going to hit that tipping point where people stop wondering whether or not it's a wasted vote and say, you know what, that's what I actually want. I'll go ahead and vote for it. So that's the kind of thing that we are working towards, and I do understand that people feel threatened when they feel like one voice of opposition on the ballot is enough and they don't want another one. And what I really like to point out is that if you're worried about the outcome of how an election is going to go, or you're angry about the possible outcome of it, that means the government has entirely too much control over your daily life. In my ideal vision, if a libertarian would win major elections, then it would be as newsworthy as maybe a big company getting a new CEO to you. If you care, you can be involved. You can show your support towards that company. Or if you don't care, you can shrug your shoulders and go about your day. So we're all about having, minimizing the impact, especially the negative impact that the government has on people's lives.
I think that pretty much answers the second question I was going to have is, even though libertarians may not win, why vote for them? So is it to ensure third-party candidates a place on ballots and on debate platforms?
Well, that's another good point. Unlike the Republicans and Democrats, we don't get to just waltz into the ballot. They make rules that serve to dissuade or discourage us, or even outright prevent us from even having a candidate on the ballot in various states. So yes, absolutely. The more support we get, the more legitimate we as a solid party are, and the harder it is for those two older parties to prevent us from being on the ballot. And this isn't some accidental thing where they're saying, oh, we're not really legitimate enough, so we don't deserve to be on the ballot. Just this year in Texas, 44 libertarian candidates were sued by the Texas Republicans to just boot us off of the ballot because they didn't want us to compete against them. There were 88 total Libertarian candidates this year that Texas fielded. But the Republicans only chose to target Libertarians in races that there was essentially a Republican who they felt could lose votes. So in several races that were uncontested against Democrats, they didn't sue those guys. So that really shows you that it's more about partisan power preservation than any kind of legitimate any kind of legitimate excuse to keep the ballots easy and simple for people to understand. So it's to drop your word in, it's political dramaturgy.
Very good. Yeah, and so one of the things, sorry, I'm feeling a little under the weather today, but televised debates and things like that, what is the criteria for whether or not they invite a candidate to debate publicly?
Well, let's start with the presidential debate, because that's going to be what most people are familiar with. Ross Perot was the last third-party candidate to appear in a presidential debate, and this is by design. He took a large chunk of votes that they assumed were theirs because people didn't like either the Republican or the Democrat. So once that happened, the Republicans and Democrats colluded together to make their own debate commission, which they would only allow Republicans and Democrats to. And as a way to get around saying, that it's illegitimate, they created polling requirements for other parties to be able to participate. Now, the thing is, they get to pick which polls they sample to justify other party inclusion. And just this year, they chose 5 polls that didn't even list the Libertarian Party candidate, Joe Jorgensen, on them. So when people are polled and they say, are you voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? And if you're a Libertarian or even considering it, you don't have the option to say that. So the polls that they're pulling from are totally bogus. The percentages that they require, as soon as we'll hit them, they'll just bump them up to a higher threshold. So it's really just designed illegitimately to keep competition out of their way.
And it seems to me that if you were to tell someone that you're voting Libertarian, they will be like, I get that. However, this election is so important. And it seems to me like, every election is like the election where, you can't take away votes from, one of the major 2 parties, because, it's life and death situation. And it seems like every election that's the case. And so if you go with that, there really is no time to vote your conscience, or if it is Libertarian, or something, third party, because every time it's going to be, there's this drama, like the losing side is going to end of the world type scenario. So yeah, I really resonate with that. Like, we are building, like, people ask, why would someone vote Libertarian? And it could be because, like you use the word building, sure. It's not very likely that Libertarians would win this year. But
actually, on the contrary, there are some seriously competitive races that we can touch on in a bit. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, okay. But maybe at least presidentially. Mm-hmm. So, it's not very likely. If you're going by yard signs, anyway, in my neighborhood. But as long as you start to vote what you really think today, right, then it's going to slowly build as it becomes not so marginalized, and if it does become more mainstream. Because there's going to be a tomorrow and the day after, there's going to be an election day, and the sun is still going to rise the next day, and we're going to have to live with choices. And, it's going to start building up to the next, 4-year election vote where, oh my gosh, it's, every vote counts unless you're not voting for the party I want you to vote for.
So ultimately it's kind of a misguided, not information-based argument. If you look at the 2016 elections, over 40% of registered voters didn't even show up on election day. So and you've got a massive chunk of the population that has gone through the effort to already get registered to vote, jump through all those hoops, and then they just said, "Nah, I'm sitting this one out." So blaming, a Republican or a Democrat loss on a party that gets, 4% of an election, and that's maybe a realistic number. We're hoping to get over 5 this year with Jorgensen, but blaming us for for having conviction, showing up and voting, and your candidate not winning because your candidate was so noxious that you repelled 40% of the population to just not show up. That's just misplaced. It's hyper partisans tend to have a problem where they are really terrible about taking a critical look at themselves and the shortcomings of some of the candidates that they put forth. I like to tell people whenever they're really kind of being a bully about my voter choices, I'll say, hey, if you nominate a good candidate, I have no reason to vote Libertarian. So that's, at a certain point, there's some responsibility that falls on them for the kind of politicians that they select and, the policies that they support.
Right. Yeah, because I was looking at my sample ballot, and, a lot of these people that you're voting for, sometimes like how they feel on gun control or abortion or immigration really has nothing to do with their role, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people are going to vote for them regardless of whether they're most qualified or not, simply because of their party affiliation. And I think that's, I think we can do better.
There's a lot of tribalism involved in political parties. People buy flags, they buy shirts, it becomes part of their identity. And whenever you challenge, bad ideas that their party might represent, they feel personally attacked. Like you are saying that what they have chosen is bad and wrong, and you are their enemy. And it's such a bad approach when it comes to developing public policy. For me, it's always an objective. What are the issues? Where are they going to stand? How are they going to represent? Is this person trustworthy? Not like I will evaluate individual candidates, and I'll vote for someone over someone in my own party if they're a better candidate and they're better on issues. And I wish more people had an objective approach to it. Within the Libertarian Party, we actually have a mechanism during our nomination processes called Ndaa, which stands for none of the above. And if there's a bad candidate running and we don't want them to represent us, we'll just not field someone. And we'd rather do that mm-hmm. than have someone we don't like representing us and making us all look bad. We're all about PR as well as strategy. And there are some bad candidates, and anyone off the street can decide to run, but the nomination is something that is a responsibility of the party. So if we nominate someone who is not good, then that's on us. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. When they vote in the Republican and Democratic primaries, they are selecting who they want to represent their party. And if they're more focused on who they think can win than who would represent them well, then they're only damaging their own brand even further.
Well, one of the qualities that I like in people is the ability to change their minds. Mm-hmm. I think, you were talking about that rigidity of, a party affiliation. And if someone were to change their mind, then that means like, wow, I've been wrong all these years. When no, you haven't been wrong. You've been voting how you voted your conscience. But if if your attitude or your beliefs change, or you have more information with which to make a decision, I think that is the most healthy thing to do, is to evolve with that changing attitude and change your opinion. Doesn't mean you were wrong yesterday, but I think if you do feel a certain way, but you're not holding to the integrity of that, then I think, if we are going to label something right or wrong, I think that would be the more wrong of the two.
Well, I don't even need I don't think that anyone necessarily needs to say that they were wrong in the past. It was just a decision that they reached based on the information that they incorporated at the time. You can compare it to something like buying cereal. Let's say you've bought Cheerios for the last 10 years of your life, and one day there's a sale on Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and you're like, you know what, I'll try it this time, and it's so good. You're not going to say, man, I was an idiot for eating Cheerios. You're going to say, man, I'm glad I found something that I really like better. And that's I think that's a lot better way to have an approach to it, because voting is a preference. It's not an identity. You're saying this is what I want to happen, and that's another thing that I like to say, because on the theme of third party being a wasted vote, a lot of people say you can't win, why vote for it? And I like to tell people, this isn't a horse race. We're not betting to see who wins. We are trying to express our preference for what we want as an outcome. And the more we do that, the more our vote totals grow, the more our percentages grow, the more people realize that this is something that they can help make happen if they finally vote the way that they were worried about voting before. So right now we are grinding. We are pushing the needle to that tipping point where once we have enough early adopters is a way you can think about it. The product of libertarianism or even other third parties, depending on what your preference is, that becomes more palatable because people say, there have been polls that show over 70% of Americans want a third party option. But when you have voter turnout in such a way that it does that they vote for the red and the blue, they're saying, I wish there was something better, but I don't want what I want least to win. And fear is such a bad motivator for how you vote. It's the most easy thing to manipulate in people. And once you understand that it's going to be bad unless we all kind of do something better, that's where the aha moment happens.
Well, let's get into what a libertarian is. One of my friends mistook the term third party to mean an independent write-in candidate, someone who just puts themselves on the ballot. And I think sometimes Republicans, if they're not familiar with what a libertarian is, they just hear it's another L word, like liberal. And then for others, it could bring to mind the Johnny Depp movie, The Libertine, in which debauchery brings the main character to an early grave. So yeah, none of those.
Well, I wouldn't say none of those. We have plenty of libertine libertarians and plenty of liberal libertarians. The great thing about being able to live your life the way you want, so long as you're not harming other people, is that you can live your life however you want. That's the most hardcore social conservative evangelical Republican can live right next door to the most wild hippie liberal they want, and as long as they're not hurting each other or their property, they can coexist under the whole idea of liberty. You don't have one trying to impose their rules about drugs or sex on the other, and you don't have one trying to impose their rules about gun restrictions or excessive taxation on the other. They can just be neighbors, and it's okay that they're not the same. So
what are some of the major libertarian platform points?
One thing that is first and foremost is we don't just kind of pick and choose platform pieces based on what's popular. We have a consistent principled approach, which is totally different from the Republicans and Democrats. And it's a lot of reason they don't really understand us. So the basis of all of that is respect for individual consent. And I want to let that sink in for a little bit, because it's going to be a recurring theme here as I go through some of the platform issues. What that means is nobody has a right to tell you what to do with your body or the fruit of your labor. And that is powerful. Again, so long as you're not hurting anyone else or restricting their ability to live the way they want, you should be able to live the way you want. So when it comes to things like taxes, we want them lower. When it comes to things like government restrictions to drugs, to gambling, to sex work, we don't want that in the way, as long as everyone's a consenting adult. We don't want barriers to immigration. Like, we want people to just move, and moving shouldn't be a crime. We want to make sure that we have just treatment towards racial and gender and sexual minorities. Like, there's no reason that the government should have laws that allow people to discriminate against them, especially if they're government employees. You can think a couple years back, I think there was a woman in the Midwest who refused to grant a marriage license to a same-sex couple, and she was, it became kind of this lightning rod of controversy. And it's like, no, you work for the government. You shouldn't be telling people what they can't do if what they're doing is based on love and happiness. It's just kind of ridiculous. Like I did kind of touch on this earlier. We do defend gun rights because we think that, so the ability to defend yourself is an inherent right, and punishing innocent people with restrictions as a way to solve a problem for people who are not innocent, it's just focusing on the wrong, punishing the wrong group. We believe that we could have a lot more affordable healthcare if we just got government out of the way. I like to use this example. In India, you can buy an insulin pen for about $11, and in the United States, it'll cost you $120 for an insulin pen. And if the government weren't prohibiting you from being able to buy insulin from India, you could just go on Amazon and order some for $11 instead. And those kind of things, like that's over 10 times difference in price, and that's all just because of government protectionism. So really, we understand that society has issues and problems, and we believe that the best way to solve those problems is by doing so in a more local way, in ways that affect your community. And like, if you think about the bystander effect, if there's a wreck and someone just shouts, call 911, most people are going to be kind of dumbfounded looking at it. But the way to effectively get someone to call 911 is to point at someone and say, you call 911. That way action is taken, and people aren't assuming that someone else is going to cover it for them. And that same issue is, when the government is supposedly helping people with welfare programs and housing assistance, all this, people tend to think, okay, well, the government's got it. And if it's not good enough with the government, we just need the government to do it more, rather than saying, we need to step up and help our own communities. We need to donate to local charities. We need to volunteer. We need to help people, when they're in need. And it's all about doing things and solving problems on a much more voluntary basis.
Right, I agree. I think a lot of people, because they are being taxed so much, and there's a large welfare system. And I guess I feel like compelled to say that my family benefited from welfare. I was one of those children that benefited from a government that stepped in and made sure we had enough to eat and provide us housing. But, I'm thinking, when I'm asked about that, it's kind of like a conflict. But I feel like sometimes if the government weren't involved, that the local church and community groups, even non-religious community action groups would have stepped in. I believe that about people, would have stepped in to help. But there's no guarantee. But again, there's no guarantee with the government either. But I know a lot of people who are not very eager to donate towards programs and nonprofits because they feel overtaxed already, overburdened, saying, I'm already paying, I'm already working, 50, 60 hours a week to pay for someone to sit at home, and not collect a paycheck.
And that breeds kind of undue resentment. It's not the person who is, receiving government help's fault necessarily. And sometimes circumstances happen that individuals can't control, no matter how much preparation you do or how many steps you take to ward off calamity. Bad things do happen to people. Sometimes there are unforeseen medical issues that could not have been prevented, that like cancer or something like that. Sometimes it's the economy can wipe out your job, or in this year the government can just declare your job to be non-essential, and then you can go and lose everything that you were working towards. So I really don't like the idea of blaming recipients for receiving government assistance. I think that we as a society, we spend, depending on how much you make, anywhere from a third to a half of what we make on taxes. And I'm not talking about just income taxes. We've got property taxes, sales taxes, excise taxes, the tariffs in this trade war against China that's going on right now are taxes. All it does is add government received money to the cost of things that we import. And when you add it up, all this federal, state, and local taxes, average Americans are paying between a third and a half of what they earn just to various governments. Can you imagine how much good could be done with people who had all of that money and they could decide, back under their own control, and they could decide to spend it on what they prioritize? So one thing that I really like to point out is whenever libertarians talk about cutting spending, the vast majority of us kind of view things from a morality scale, whereas this this government action is helping people who really need it. This government action is actively hurting people. And when we talk about cuts, we talk about cutting from the actively hurting end of that scale first. That's where I think the most good can be done. For example, right now, or for the last, the current and former two presidential administrations, we have been drone bombing the Middle East and killing innocent civilians in the tens of thousands. And that's actual murder that our government is committing with our tax dollars. And it's so morally objectionable, but most people can't even have a conversation about reducing spending in that area because the demagogues will say, oh, you're just targeting, or you just don't support the troops, or you don't support freedom. And
you're labeled very unpatriotic all of a sudden.
Exactly. And it's, our government is spending our money to kill innocent people. That's the bottom line. And the United States hasn't declared a war since World War II. So it's been 70 years, or I'm sorry, 80 years now at this point, since our government has declared war, but we've been in nearly constant conflict for the majority of our entire lives. And that's a huge place where we spend trillions of dollars year over year. And it's just a black hole of death and wasted money, and not to mention all of the American soldiers we do support who are having their lives needlessly threatened or damaged, or many soldiers come back home with PTSD and have to deal with that, and have a higher suicide rate than the civilian population of almost double. These are serious issues that libertarian solutions would be, hey, I don't know, let's use our national defense on actually defending America, instead of creating all of this conflict around the world.
All right, Elliott. Hold on. So, Elliott, let's talk about the porcupine. That is our. That is. So, if I haven't already kind of blown the whistle, I'm a libertarian myself, and so I identify with the porcupine. And like you said, unless something changes or there's a more qualified candidate, then I'm more than willing to change my mind and my vote. But I feel like the Libertarian Party more closely aligns with my own values. So let's talk about the porcupine. I think it's kind of a cool little mascot.
Yeah, so the whole concept there is that libertarians don't believe in initiating aggression. That's kind of our bread and butter for how our approach is to solving problems. And if you are starting a conflict, you're in the wrong. And that kind of applies, or is embodied by a porcupine, where they are a very defensively oriented animal. They they can ward off attacks from lions. They and you think this small mammal isn't really capable, but it's got all these defensive spines on it. So whenever a larger predator or something comes after it, it has the ability to just kind of hunker down and defend itself. And otherwise, it's just a peaceful animal that's making its way through the world. It's a really clever selection. You've got the elephants and the Republicans who stomp around and have no idea what they're doing. You've got the jackasses and the Democrats, and I'll I'll leave that one as is. But yeah, I like that we have the porcupine as our mascot for that reason.
Always wondered about the donkey. Why do you have any idea why? I haven't Googled it to see.
I haven't Googled it either. I would just say stubbornness is the most prominent feature of a donkey. So, maybe that. I don't know. Maybe
they were digging in their heels on an issue and they decided to.
I don't know. You'd think that they would select mascots that were a little more complimentary to their causes, but
maybe they can address that in their next caucus or something. All right, let's go to some Facebook questions.
okay.
Becca Congdon, She asked, how would a libertarian in government deal with climate change? Does government need to play a role?
Yeah, so that is something that most libertarians probably don't want to be asked, but this is something I don't have any problem dealing with. So one thing, climate change is real, and that shouldn't be a controversial point of discussion. We've got a lot of scientific data that shows it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you, the individual American hearing this response right now, are personally responsible and you need to change your entire life. What it does mean is that you should probably make better decisions so that your impact to the contributing factors of climate change are minimalized. Now, the whole idea of having the government deal with it's kind of frustrating from a logistical standpoint, because the United States military is the single largest polluter on the entire planet. Like, if you're ranking organizations, the U.S. military is the largest polluter, and it's really frustrating to say, hey, I know that the U.S. government makes a lot of messes, but it should also be responsible for telling us how to clean them up, and that rubs me the wrong way. I think that the best approach to dealing with pollution in general, and we can talk about contributing factors to climate change, is by holding polluters accountable. So when you have giant organizations like that or giant corporations who are actively polluting, there should not be a limit on liability for people who are harmed by that pollution to be able to seek restitution. And the current corporate model in the United States of America gives liability ceilings on companies and almost complete liability protection for the government from civil cases. So if the government's polluting, or if a company is polluting, there is a cap after which they're no longer responsible for it. And that kind of creates almost a monetary incentive to figure out, if we can make more money polluting than it will cost us in that cap, then it's a business decision to go ahead and pollute. And that is such a bad incentive. So letting the courts work, allowing class action lawsuits for polluters, I think is the best way to solve both pollution and climate change kind of going forward. We also need to stop subsidizing, like the same government that you want to, solve this issue is currently subsidizing fossil fuels, and it's subsidizing all sorts of, there are farming subsidies that kind of contribute as well, but all of these subsidies are actively combating the goal of not wanting to be heavily dependent on fossil fuels. So I say this with some credibility because I've worked in the oil and gas industry here in Houston for most of my career. And I understand that the market is the best way to solve this. And most people don't want the earth to boil over or the seas to rise. And most people want to say, if I can make a conscious decision to do the more responsible thing, I'd like to do it, so long as it's not been priced out of reach.
All right, I think that we have two questions from Arthur M. Thomas IV. First question is, healthcare is such a complex issue that many people care about. The government is already very involved. What is your approach to dealing with meeting people's concerns about not going broke if healthcare issues happen in their lives? And I think you kind of touched on that already, but if you would kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, I touched on how government right now is largely contributes to the high cost of medicine, but medicine's not the only part of healthcare. There's also the treatment factor. So I think the best way to lower the cost for everything involved is for most people to adopt catastrophic insurance coverage only, and then use their routine visits, paying cash out of that rather than having insurance cover that. This solves a couple of problems. Well, one, if you want to think about it like your auto insurance, you don't use insurance every time you go to get an oil change or even to fill up at the gas station. That would be silly. And those are just costs of maintaining your vehicle. You use your insurance when you have a major breakdown or a collision and you want to be, have your vehicle made whole. If you apply that same concept to medicine, you don't have the cost of insurance being drastically out of reach by just routine visits. Like, say you need to go get a prescription refilled, you have to pay a copay, and your insurance pays the majority of that doctor visit where you have to just go in and, something you already know that you need, you just ran out of, you have to go and get that covered. So you could have a tracking system to avoid medication abuse without having to go see a doctor every single time to get a prescription refilled. And another thing is pricing generally comes down in a competitive market when people actually see the prices and make decisions based on those prices. Right now, the system is you just go to the doctor and the insurance pays whatever the price is and you pay your copay. So there's almost no incentive for people to make conscious consumer decisions on where they spend their money and what the pricing of it is. If they were doing out of pocket, like I talked about, more towards the oil change or gas fill up situation, you would be able to have cheaper overall coverage because number one, your insurance is cheaper because it's catastrophic only. And number two, your other routine checkup services are cheaper because you're actually, you force healthcare providers to compete on the basis of price as well as service offering. So it benefits the consumer to care about price. And right now the government has created a situation where that just isn't a factor.
His second question is, voter fraud and ballot tampering have become topics around this election, it seems, more than other elections. He's curious, what are your thoughts on whether you see this as a problem, and if so, what should be done?
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those topics that particularly the Republican Party likes to trot out as a giant scapegoat for what they want to do. And what they want to do is really restrict the amount of people who vote in especially in large cities, because those demographics tend to vote against them by and large. And so what they're doing is they're pushing their thumb on the scale in an attempt to, maintain the power that they are currently enjoying. And I say that speaking as a Texan, the Texas GOP has been shameless this year in terms of their attempts to restrict voter participation, and they've claimed, we're worried about voter suppression, but that doesn't explain why they tried to again sue half of the Texas Libertarian candidates off of the ballot unsuccessfully, thankfully. It doesn't explain why they have restricted mail-in ballot options, or attempted to restrict mail-in ballot options for people who aren't over 65 or aren't actually disabled during a pandemic. It doesn't explain why they have tried to limit drop-off locations for mailing ballots once those went out, despite their efforts, to only one location per county. All of their attempts right now are they're just trying to nudge things in their direction so that they can win. It's not about preventing fraud. It's about actually cheating in a sense that they're trying to make legal so that they can win. They're not concerned about the integrity of the process. That all they care about is trying to win. And if they were concerned about the integrity of the process, we would have online secure voting by now. But that would allow it to be a lot more accessible to more people, especially younger people, and they don't want those demographics participating as much because they want to stay in power. The fact that we can pay our taxes online and it's secure enough for the federal government, but we can't vote online is just kind of ridiculous. You could keep open polling locations for people who aren't comfortable with it. I'm not saying we need to remove options from people. I just think that we should make it voting as open and transparently available to everyone as possible.
So I was dropping off mail for my work last week. And it was it had a sign on the drive-by mailbox saying ballot location, mail off. And there was a gentleman there that was manning it, the drop-off. Do you know what that's about? Is that if I were there to drop off a vote, would he be the person to check to make sure I was who I said I was? Or do you know why that person was there?
That is not, there are different voting rules for different municipalities all over the country. I'm not sure if that was a legitimate one or if that was bogus. I would be a little hesitant though, because if it weren't at an official polling location listed on my local county's, district judge's website, then I would not leave my vote there because I would worry it would either not be counted or manipulated in a way that went against what I believed in and what I wanted to support. So the only way to combat that is to make sure that we're informed voters. So don't be talked into something. Do your research on a legitimate government website. Find out where their actual locations are and drop them off that way. Because otherwise the system is ripe for abuse of those who would trick people in an attempt to gain political advantage.
Okay, another question. I have seen at least two people on my Facebook feed post pictures of them having received mail-in ballots or voter registration cards for people who were not them. And so they were attributing that to, wow, if I can receive someone else's voter registration card or mail-in ballot, it was one of the two, then this is how easily people can manipulate the system. Or if we were to go to where we were accepting mail-in ballots, what's to keep someone else from voting in my place, that kind of thing. So I mean, I can see what you're saying. Like, it would be better to go to some type of secure online voting to prevent that from happening to begin with. But I guess it goes back to the guy's question, if you thought it was a problem.
I think that the actual cases that turn out for voter fraud are statistically negligible. In almost every election, I've never seen an election close enough where they've said, okay, well, there was suspicion of 100,000 cases of voter fraud, and that turns the tide of this election. No, and that doesn't happen. You do see cases, if they're even founded. There'll be a handful of cases in an area, and it won't ultimately affect it. So I think that the logic of trying to diminish people's access on that it's not one that's really founded in statistical reality. So it's definitely used, though, to limit who can participate, and that evidence has been proven. And again, my preference is secure. Obviously, I don't want to encourage fraud. I definitely encourage you, if you receive the wrong ballot, to immediately report that and get that corrected, as the moral thing to do. But it's essentially crying wolf. And what it does is it calls into question the legitimacy of the process, and it's being used as an excuse to limit people's options. So it's just not a valid concern as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So after the election tomorrow, so your life could go one of two ways.
Yes.
So talk about what that looks like for Elliott.
Well, I'm really glad that the election tomorrow. This has been a very active campaign that I've run, and I am really looking forward to taking some downtime, whether that's between inauguration day and next year, or whether that's just the election cycle's over and I get to relax for a minute. But what it looks like for me is putting my 2 weeks notice in with my job and doing some house hunting in Washington, D.C. So that would be a drastic change from Houston. And I guess I'd have to move there during the D.C. winter, which it doesn't really snow here in Houston. So that'll be a little a bit of a change. I'll also have to hire a staff to help support me both here locally in Houston, so that we can have accountability to the constituents of Texas' 2nd District and in the surrounding Houston area, and also staff in DC to help me craft the language on the bills that I plan to introduce, and help me vet the ones that I will have to decide to support or oppose. I'm one of those rare people who does not vote based on partisan lines. I want to make sure that I read everything thoroughly before I commit to it. And, you have to have a competent and reliable staff in order to do that, because some of these bills, they are thousands of pages long, and you get a day to read them. And there's no way that you can have any full understanding of that without having a competent team behind you to support you. I'll also have to begin the process of being an extreme minority in Congress. And that means I will have to caucus on an issue by issue basis with the Democrats and Republicans if I ever want to get anything. And they'll have to court me on an issue by issue basis if they want to help push the needle on close votes for themselves. So I feel like it's an amazing opportunity to have libertarians represent represent the people in Congress, because the whole point of Congress is to be representative of the people. And right now we have parties that make up 40% of the electorate controlling 98% of the votes, and it's just it's a misrepresentation in its present form.
And if pardon me. So, and then if it goes the other way, does life go on as normal and you consider running again?
I have been asked multiple times this question, and I'm going to get through this election and make my decision then. I might decide to run again because I have built up a lot of momentum, more so than any previous Libertarian in this race. I might decide to focus on a different race entirely where I can get some more traction. I think I would, if I were running in a two-person race that was not contested by a Democrat and a Republican, I have a clear path to victory there. Right now, I think the lowest threshold I need in order to win is 34% in a three-way race, and that's something I've been heavily pushing for. I've been trying to activate the apathetic voters, like I mentioned earlier, who are registered to vote but just don't. I've been reaching across, and ultimately it comes down to what the effect of this election is. If I make a huge splash and I take a big bite out of the percentage that no Libertarian in this race has done before, then I kind of feel obligated to keep at it, because congressional elections are every 2 years. So I'd probably take a couple months off and then be back on the campaign trail. So it really just depends on how things turn out, to be honest. I'm really looking forward to seeing the results and seeing what the what kind of outcome all of this effort has yielded.
Well, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I am on Ballotpedia. It says Scheffler ran in the 2012 election for Texas House of Representatives, District 3. Scheffler ran unopposed in the May 29th primary election and would have been challenged by Cecil Bell Jr. in the general election, which took place on November 6th, 2012. However, Scheffler no longer appears on the Libertarian Party's official list of candidates. That was because, when I was getting notifications from the Libertarian Party, I was like, why not me? Mm-hmm. I was thinking, if it's supposed to be representative of the people, here I was, a working mother, and, why not have my voice, representative of the people, in that district. However, I was the only Libertarian in my house, and I didn't have a lot of support, even in my own family. And so I went ahead and decided, I withdrew from the election. And I'm glad I did. Things were happening. I was dealing with a lot of grief in my life. I had lost a brother, and then I had some postpartum depression with my daughter. And so it was very challenging time, and so it just didn't work, and I'm glad now that it didn't happen. But I also think, would I have been up to the task of all of the the poo slinging, because I was also getting a little freaked out because people were digging up dirt, and just like every person, I'm not perfect, and I'm sure there's something that someone could dig up and throw at me. But I was like, if I didn't feel like I had the support at home, and then I just didn't feel, and I still don't feel like I express myself verbally very well. And I really appreciate that about you. I can see that you are very smooth. The issues down pat, and you're able to express yourself very well. And so I, as a Libertarian, was really happy to have you as a candidate so that I can vote for you tomorrow. So thank you for all of your effort and time. And I know that it does take a lot. So I want to thank, I guess, your wife. Are you married, or is it your girlfriend?
We're engaged, actually.
Okay, well, congratulations. And
Thank
so,
you. We're not doing any wedding planning until after the election, so that's another thing I'm looking forward to doing once we
yes, and
have
I
some
bet
free
she
time.
is too. Yeah. So anyway, I want to say thanks to her, your unseen, rather kind of behind the scenes partner there, because I know it's not just the person that's
Oh,
running, but it's
absolutely.
their entire support system. So thanks for representing us, and I hope you get a chance to do that in Washington for us.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. And as someone who has initiated a a campaign in the past, it is there's so much to do. There's so many people to respond to. There's so much you feel like you should be doing when when you're not. And it is a full-time job in itself, just running a campaign. And I absolutely could not do that without the support of my fiance Liz. She's been an absolute rock. She has really good ideas. Her profession is marketing, so she's helped me a lot with tweaking some of my messaging and in ways that aren't just like, hey, most people don't care about when you shout audit the Fed, but if you say, hey, your dollars are worth less because of government policy, that means when you're saving money, you're losing money. People can pay more attention to that. So yeah, I again could not have done it without her. And I am really looking forward to seeing the incredible successes that the Libertarians Party is going to have tomorrow. Right now, we have there's a candidate running in Wyoming who has a really good shot of winning in a two-way race. There's another one running for Senate in Arkansas who is just kicking ass. There's a governor candidate in Indiana who is doing amazing as well. Like, all of these are winnable, very winnable competitive races, and I'm super excited to see how they turn out. As again, like, just talking about this is getting me more excited again and making me feel like I can't not run again. So this is a cause that I really care about, and it means a lot to be able to have the opportunity to do this. If you are if you're hearing this and you're interested in following me, I have a very active Facebook and Twitter presence. On Facebook, it's just Scheirman for Congress, which is Scheirman is how you spell my last name. And on Twitter, it's at Vote Scheirman. So again, Scheirman. You can find me on either one of those spots, or you can check out my issues and campaign updates at ScheirmanForCongress.com.
Perfect. That was the next thing. You're running my podcast for me. But how can people find out more about you and follow what you're making in your own sandbox? So there you have it. And I'll include that in the show notes. That it'll make it easier for people to just click on it. And I looked at your Facebook page and I saw several of the videos, and I think that I liked it because it kind of clarified. Your stance on certain issues, and I don't know, it reinforced my confidence in voting for you. So
Thank you
I
so much.
I liked the
I love
videos.
hearing feedback.
Yeah. Let's see here. This last segment, I love how in the Lifestylist podcast, Luke Story ends off his podcasts asking his guests this question: who have been 3 teachers or teachings in your life that you might share with our audience that they could go research and also learn from?
Okay, well, I think the first person to kind of open my mind to this whole concept was probably Ron Paul. He was kind of iconic in his stance for liberty and his unapologetic opposition to federal control, and that was something that nobody was really talking about in the late 2000s there, and the aughts, I guess you call them. And yeah, that opened up a lot. So much so that I kind of held my nose in 2012 and went as a delegate to the Texas GOP convention to help nominate him as a candidate for president back when he was running in the 2012 election. So he really inspired me a lot. Since discovering him, I would say Frederic Bastiat. He's an author. He wrote a book called The Law, which is really good at simplifying and explaining things that are just an understandable, tangible approach that people who don't really understand libertarianism and as deeply as someone like me at this point can get. One of his quotes that will always stick with me is, people confuse opposition to the government with doing something as opposition to that thing happening itself. And whereas you can say, I don't want the government to, to buy my food for me. People who disagree with you would say, well, that means you don't want people to have food. And that's just not the case. It's, no, I don't want the government to do it because it's bad and it makes mistakes and it hurts people and it removes choice. I want people to have food and I want to help them have food. I just don't want the government to force it. So that was a really good book, I think, that helps kind of turn the way of thinking on really in my brain when it comes to freedom as a solution for things. So if you're listening to this, it's a good read. It's called The Law by Frédéric Bastiat. And I would say probably my present best role model is Representative Justin Amash. He is the only Libertarian Party congressman that is serving right now in office. He was elected, I believe, 4 terms as a Republican, but the Trump just Trumpism that took over the GOP made him say, I can't be associated with this. This is bad. And, America needs better than this. And he said, look, these are already my principles anyway. I am a libertarian. I am now a member of the Libertarian Party. And he is also unique in his role as a congressman in that he provides an explanation of every single vote that he makes, that he casts in his role. He says, this is the situation. This is why I support it. This is a situation and why I don't support it. And even if it sounds like it is if the bill is named in a way that sounds favorable that he might like, he'll say, I went through it, I read it, I found a rider in here that is totally unacceptable and I can't support this or voting for this. As an example, sorry to ramble here, but this is kind of a big important point. Congress passed the Ndaa, which is basically the authorization for ongoing military spending for next year. And that, most people would say it's patriotic, vote for the military so the troops have their jobs and their money and all this stuff. But hidden within that was a little rider in a rule that said that veterans, people who are no longer active military, but veterans, can be targeted and have their guns taken from them with no cause other than some government agent saying, hey, I think maybe they're a threat. There's no crimes have been committed.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, whenever I get these flyers in the mail and it says that so-and-so voted against this or that, I take it that, even though as bad as that sounds, what else was in that bill that made them say no to that? And so, you just have to think about what else could have been in that bill that they voted against something that was so obviously, nice or good.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the only way to fix that problem is to have bills be, individual topics be voted on their individual merit. And that's the only way to fix this. As long as you can add a poison pill rider or a sweetheart deal for someone, if you can just buy their support, you're going to have ongoing corruption and problems with the entire process.
Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can.
No, that's okay. That was the idea I was getting at, is essentially veterans were able to be targeted to have their guns taken away from them. I can't imagine a less deserving group of people for the government to target and remove their rights than veterans. It's just, it's unconscionable.
Yeah. Well, let's talk, Elliott. I like I said, I feel confident from having talked with you and everything. That you're a great libertarian candidate. What would you, if you were asked what your, what's the word? What are your qualities that make you qualify? What are your qualifications for running for this particular office?
Very good question. So my professional career is 13 years of experience in supply chain project management. And that means that I have a professional expertise in delivering projects on time and under budget. And that's kind of the opposite of the way the government does things. And I think that, that we could use a little bit more diversity in terms of professional expertise when it comes to lawmaking. Right now it's full of lawyers and they're really good at making things either easy to pass or difficult to understand based on what they want to accomplish. And we need people who are honest and straightforward and have the ability to solve problems and have that as their actual focus. One thing that I noticed in the debate that I had with my 2 opponents, which you can find the video for that on either my Facebook or YouTube channel, is that they just wanted to bicker over who was lying and who was wrong. And I was the only one in that who was actually talking about how to solve problems. And when you have people who actually want to solve problems, all of this hyper-partisanship goes away. The idea is to have problems that are solved for everyone involved, not just special interest groups. So that's definitely a unique qualifier that I have, that I wish more candidates for office would have, no matter what party they're in.
I think more people, I think there are more libertarians out there than than they know. I think people who are, if they were to look at the libertarian platform, would be like, oh wow, this is actually what I believe. Mm-hmm. And so, but they just haven't been presented with that because they feel like it's either one or the other. I have these two options. And there is a third option.
And even those who have heard of it are constantly told, like we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, they're told that it's a wasted vote, or that they can never win, and that just defeats them in their own mind before they even cast a vote. It's something that we have to overcome, and we have to help people realize that, if you want things to get better, you have to vote differently.
Yeah. So again, it goes back to, I'm thankful for that article, because it prompted me to try and reach out to you, so that we can give people like the permission slip, whereas I felt like maybe that article was kind of trying to take away their power, their sovereignty, and replace it with fear. I want this conversation to empower people to make their own decision, to reclaim their sovereignty, and vote for the future that they want to see. So
exactly, that effort is not going to happen unless you take the action to change it. We have to combat the bullying that goes towards third-party voters. They don't want our voices to be heard, and that's not what voting should be about.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast. I happened to see on your Facebook page that you've been on a couple of other podcasts, and it kind of looked like they had their game together, and so I felt like, oh my gosh. But I just I don't feel like I'm very polished with this quite yet, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to do my thing here on Scheffy's Sandbox podcast, and to give it, my April flavor, because
don't sell yourself short. This is great, and it's authentic, which is a great presentation, and that's a great basis for a podcast.
Well, thank you, Elliott, so much for joining me in Scheffy's Sandbox. And listeners, please vote. Vote Libertarian, vote Democratic, vote Green Party, vote Republican. I just encourage you to vote from a place of love, empowerment, personal sovereignty, and not from a place of fear or hate of the, quote, other. We're in this together, and this idea of separation is really an illusion. I'll see you all on the other side of November 3rd. Much love to you all.